Those professionals said America is unrecognizable and heading for a collapse.
Some of the world's leading money managers are warning the collapse of another American bank.
There's some days I wake up and read the news and look around me and say, I don't recognize this country anymore.
We're going to take a look at a review, courtesy of Kirk Durston, thank you, sir, of a 600-page whopper that was compiled by unbelieving sociologist J.D. Unwin. Decades of work as he researched and studied 86 cultures to see if there's a connection between sexual mores, values, behavior, and human flourishing. The highest flourishing of culture, the most powerful combination, was prenuptial chastity coupled with absolute monogamy.
The rings, please.
Rationalist cultures that retained this combination for at least 3 generations exceeded all other cultures in every area, including literature, art, science, architecture, engineering, and agriculture. If total sexual freedom was embraced by a culture, that culture collapsed within 3 generations to the lowest state of flourishing, which Unwin describes as inert. The effect of sexual constraints, increased sexual constraints, either pre or post-nuptial, always led to increased flourishing of a culture. Conversely, increased sexual freedom always led to the collapse of a culture 3 generations later. When a culture has an attitude, prenuptially or postnuptially, that is conservative, you know, the way the Bible tells us to do it, whether they believe in the Bible or not, culture flourishes. When a society is liberal, what happens? The society goes down the tubes.
Fascinating.
Single most influential factor, surprisingly, the data revealed that the single most important correlation with the flourishing of a culture was whether prenuptial chastity was required or not. It had a very significant effect either way. The highest flourishing of culture, the most powerful combination, was prenuptial chastity coupled with absolute monogamy. Rationalist cultures that retained this combination for at least 3 generations exceeded all other cultures in every area, including literature, art, science, furniture, architecture, engineering, and agriculture. Why? Because God's principles work, whether a culture believes in them or not, because God designed the universe to run a certain way. When a culture even blindly follows those precepts, they're going to flourish. Cultures that don't won't. The effect of abandoning prenuptial chastity. When strict prenuptial chastity was no longer the norm in a culture, absolute monogamy, deism, and rational thinking also disappeared within 3 generations. Note this well. If a culture abandons conservative fidelity in prenuptial and postnuptial relationships, 3 generations, down she goes. Total sexual freedom. If total sexual freedom was embraced by a culture, that culture collapsed within 3 generations to the lowest state of flourishing, which Unwin describes as inert, a dead level of conception, and is characterized by people who have little interest in much else other than their own wants and needs. At this level, the culture is usually conquered or taken over by another culture with greater social energy. Tick, tick, tick. Do you hear the time passing? Western civilization. How long might it be till we see a collapse culturally? Prior to the sexual revolution, which began in the late 60s, prenuptial chastity was still held in strong regard by Western culture. But in the 70s, premarital sexual freedom became increasingly acceptable. By the early 2000s, the majority of teens were sexually active to the extent that remaining a virgin until marriage, regarded with disbelief, if not ridicule at the same time. Our culture was moved from a social norm of absolute monogamy to modified monogamy. Let's start doing some math. Where are we at? When did we start to change? Call it the 60s, call it the 70s. Unwin says, look out, within 3 generations, it's inescapable. Down you go.
Oh, no.
Another math question. How long is a generation according to Unwin? His definition was 33 years. Let's call that, therefore, 3 times 33, 100 years from when those societal values changed. The math is never tidy on this, but it looks like we could be 50 years away from being a dead culture? Unwin makes it clear he doesn't know why sexual freedom directly leads to the decline and collapse of cultures. Although he suggests that when sexual energy is restrained through celibacy or monogamy, it is diverted into more productive social energy. Unwin himself admits, I've studied the cultures, the conclusions, they are concrete and inevitable, but I can't figure out why.
Why?
Of course he can't. He doesn't have a Bible to guide him. The Bible tells us why we are seeing sexual freedom. Sexual freedom doesn't come first, resulting in a conclusion of a fallen society, postmodern thinking, and agnosticism or atheism. It's a belief in God that causes all of these things. When a society stops believing in God, their brains are going to get muddled. Their cultural flourishing is going to disappear because they are so consumed with self and pleasuring of self. And then ultimately, you are going to see complete perversion. The heart of the problem is the problem of the heart. And the Christian solution, what a shocker. If we do not like seeing society crumble, and who of us does, the solution is, surprise, the gospel. Houston, I think we have a few problems here.
Go ahead, Wretched One.
Besides the fact I'm wearing a cardboard helmet, Houston, you have got one of the biggest false teachers in the universe. Are you kidding? He is so rich.
How rich is he, Wretched One?
I can see his house from here.